Hello and welcome back to Logan Sounds Off. And today on my podcast, I am very excited to be talking to Tanita Tikaram about her debut album, Ancient Heart, as well as her new album, which I'm very excited for, called Liar, Love Isn't a Right, which is going to be released on the 10th of October this year. How are you, Tanita?
I'm great. How are you? How are
I'm doing
you?
fantastic. I get to chat to one of my favorite musicians about an album that I'm
Oh,
really looking forward to this autumn. So it's
oh, brilliant.
fantastic. So, for those who don't know you, Tanisha, could you tell us a
Yes.
little bit about yourself?
Okay. So I'm a singer-songwriter. I was born in Germany. My parents are from Malaysia and Fiji. And so as I was growing up, I was really just a kid who liked lots of different artistic things. And at the age of 16, 17, I started writing songs, and I ended up making an album very early at the age of 18, and that was Ancient Heart. It was quite a big success, and I've been writing songs and performing since that point, since the age of 18, and I'm 55 now, so it's quite a long time. So the new album is kind of quite connected to the first album because it's a kind of taking stock and looking at the world and it from the perspective of an older person, obviously, but they kind of make sense together, I think.
It's really, really cool, actually, kind of referring back to the album, but bringing a whole new musical style to the table. So it's really, really interesting. And we're going to get into that and much more. But I'd love to ask you about when you were first moving to England at 12. I know one
Yeah.
thing that you were heavily inspired by was you didn't listen to much music, but you did go to the theatre a lot. And I
Oh,
wanted to
yeah.
ask, did the stories maybe that you saw in the theatre or the different films you watched, because that's a really interesting art form, and I was kind of going, that's really, really curious. Do you think that inspired any of your songwriting when you were 17 and 18 starting to write songs?
Yeah, I do. I think for me, Basingstoke is just a very ordinary suburban kind of overspill from London. I think it's not the most exciting town. There's nothing wrong with the town, but it's not particularly. Yeah, so I kind of was like wanting to understand the world, and for me, the way to understand the world was through theatre and film. That was my education, and learning about other people, and learning about diversity, and learning about also telling stories and listening to voices. Because in theatre, the thing that you listen to most of all are how people speak and how people use their voice. So maybe where I was really listening intently was in the theatre more than going to concerts, because I didn't really go to a lot of concerts because concerts weirdly were less accessible. They were more expensive. Going to the theatre as a young person was actually quite cheap. So I would be going, yeah, that was the thing that I really was dazzled by and I also came to England from Germany, so I hadn't been able to go to theatre when I was in Germany. I hadn't, my German is really non-existent, so there wasn't a lot of cultural activity. So for me, Basingstoke actually was giving me a lot of access to things I hadn't really experienced before. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And I just thought, as an art form, because when I'm researching people, I love seeing like, oh well, this person was inspired by this poet, or this person was
Yeah, yeah.
really into drawing. But I don't come across much people who went to the theater a lot. So that's really, really cool. And I wanted to chat to you about that, and that's really awesome. And with writing at a young age. How did you get into songwriting? Was it something that you kind of went, I have an idea for a song, I might just write it down, and it grew from there? Because I knew you eventually compiled a demo tape, which you
Yeah,
sent
yeah.
to a club in London, which
Yeah.
led to your first
Yeah,
gig.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
was it very much a kind of domino effect, or was it something that you were planning for a long time?
Well, I think when I was really young, about 7 or 8, we just had a guitar in the house, and kids would just kind of make songs up. So I was kind of making songs up, but not thinking it was a job. It was just kind of fun. When I got to adolescence, about 13, 14, 15, I was beginning to think, ooh, what would be a life that would be an interesting life? And the possibility of escaping a normal job. And for me, it was definitely being an artist. I didn't know if it was going to be a songwriter or an actor, or I was quite good at drawing as well at school. So I, I just knew that I didn't want to be in a 9 to 5 job. I just wanted to do something artistic. And, and so I just wrote songs, and it was very natural for me. I just felt like, oh, I'll just write a song, and that's it. I don't really know how it came out. It just was something I could do. And then there was a songwriter called Suzanne Vega who
Oh yeah.
became really popular around, again, when I was a teenager. And I think for me, I understood that you didn't have to be a particular kind of person to be in music. You didn't have to necessarily be particularly extravagant or glamorous. It could be about writing songs. So I think I made a connection there.
Yeah.
And
That's really, really cool. And I get that where you're saying kind of you don't have to be a certain thing to be a musician.
no, exactly.
Yeah, because you're growing, like, I grew up watching some music videos and seeing all this very theatrical music videos going, oh, so this is what music's meant to be. And then I'm listening, then about 2 years ago, I was exposed to a lot of avant-garde music.
Oh, what, like
And
what? Like tell me.
Leia Bertucci, I
Ooh,
discovered her music. She's a really cool composer. She has an album
wow.
called Of Shadow and Substance. And I was like, oh, so this is what a musician can be too. And then I discovered somebody like Callie Malone who plays the organ
Wow.
and can play like this 10-minute organ piece, but it's like transcending you. And I was going from
Oh
listening
my
to like
God.
David Bowie, like Ziggy
Yeah,
Stardust to
yeah,
this, and
yeah,
I was like,
yeah.
okay, so now I've kind of processed it and I'm getting to listen to a lot more of that music and getting to, because at the heart of all music is creativity. And I think what you said there about not having a 9 to 5 job, at the heart of it,
Yeah, yeah,
you wanted
yeah.
to be creative, which I think is really, really cool. And that's what adds a bit of depth to your music, in my opinion, is
Yeah.
that creative output that not everybody has.
Mm.
But starting off, I know that the first time you appeared on TV, you were signed
Yeah.
to a record label, which led very quickly to Ancient Heart. So it all kind of started very quickly after when you were 17.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I
Could you
was
take us back to that time?
yeah. So basically, I sent a tape. At that time, you sent a tape to the only place I'd literally heard of, which was the Mean Fiddler, which was owned by Vince Power. And Vince, sadly, he's no longer with us. But Vince, um, I don't really understand why, but there were literally 3 people in the acoustic room. So the acoustic room was the room next to the larger room, and I think Paul Brady was playing in the larger room. So I think his agent was in the venue, and Vince Power said, "Oh, I think you should see this girl." So there was maybe 3 people in the audience, but one of them was an important agent, and so that's how my career started. So from my first gig, it just makes you think it doesn't matter what you're doing. There could be somebody in that room who's just really important and can change your life, really. So it was Paul Charles from
Yeah,
Asgard, and so he became eventually my manager. But I just started to support people. Very, you know, a lot of songwriters. Was very lucky, and just that was my education in music.
that's really, really cool. But it's just kind of going, yeah, well, I just wrote songs, then I made a demo tape, then I played my first gig, then I got signed. It's very calm, this story. You say it
Yeah,
very calmly. When in fairness, it's a very exciting story. And Paul Brady, funny enough, when I was researching about Good Tradition, because Paul
he's on
plays,
it
I believe, mandolin on the track,
and
funny
whistle.
enough, you're not the first person I've interviewed who's actually worked with Paul. I interviewed John Kelly,
Ah, okay.
who I really admire, and he worked with Paul Brady as well. So that was
Wow.
really, really cool, those connections. But that's really, really interesting. And how did you find though, at that young an age, 18,
Yeah,
before even you knew like Good Tradition or Twist of My Sobriety were going to
yeah,
be
yeah,
massive hits and
yeah,
well
yeah.
known, releasing an album, was that something that was very exciting, or was it something that naturally, like everything up to this point, came quite naturally? Or was it something that you were kind of nearly a bit anxious about, a little bit apprehensive, bringing this creation into the world?
No, sorry. No, I was very lucky because I was working with a really lovely people, Rod Argent from the Zombies, and Peter Van Hook, the drummer, and we how it happened was I I worked with them for a couple of songs just to see if it would kind of be a good match, and they were so nice. And the thing about Rod Argent is he had his first big hit when he was 18. He had a big hit with She's Not There. He was the songwriter, so he had a lot of experience and knowledge, and was really he's a very kind man. So I think I was really looked after in a nice way, and it was just fun. I don't think anybody thought the album was going to be particularly big. It was just a quiet signing on Warner's, and then the album started to take shape, and I think they got excited about it. But yeah, yeah, maybe I should be more excited about things. Do you think I'm not an excited person? I'm not excited enough. No,
No,
yeah.
you were too focused on your creativity at the time. You weren't worrying about putting out the album. You were just too focused on the creativity.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I get it. Like, and obviously then that album became a massive hit, Ancient Heart,
Yeah,
with
yeah.
My Sobriety, as we mentioned earlier, Good Tradition with Paul Brady, and that's really, really cool. He came out with a stellar second album then, but I'd love to actually, I'm trying to segue this perfectly, I don't want to sound like I'm jumping, but Sentimental had actually featured, and I was reading this going, oh my God, because yesterday, when I discovered sorry, today I discovered, oh, Nick Lowe actually played on that song that I love. Funny enough,
Yeah.
I was watching Nick Lowe on Amoeba doing What's in My Bag, and he was like recommending Viagra Boys, and I was going, Nick, you are class. So I was going, Nick was still fresh in my mind from the day before because I loved Indoor Safari from
Ah,
earlier last year, I think I heard it. So Nick Lowe featured on that album. How did you get in touch with Nick, and what was it like working with him twice on the record?
well, okay, so how that happened was basically the musicians I work with were Nick's band on that particular album. So uh, they were like a little gang. So they kind of went everywhere together, basically. So yeah, that's how the producer Neil was the producer of Nick's albums, and Bobby the drummer. He was a very unfortunately he's also passed away, but he was a really close friend of Nick. So that's how they kind of got him involved. And I think it was listening to I can't remember which album by Nick that I thought, oh, I really like that album and I'd like to work with that team. So, yeah, that's how it happened. It's a great artist, yeah.
That's really, really awesome. And for me, who's kind of still getting into Nick's work, like I've only heard Indoor Safari, which is a very
Ah,
interesting introduction to Nick Lowe's music. But seeing him on What's in My Bag and getting to speak to you about him, it's really, really cool for me as a fan,
yeah,
getting
yeah.
this first-hand information about getting into Nick Lowe's music. So I'm very excited to delve in to his catalogue, and I'd love to speak with Nick someday. I know he's playing. I believe he's playing over here in Ireland actually pretty soon.
Yeah, too.
I think so. I'm not following many live shows because I don't go to many, but I think he is coming over soon. But as well as Sentimental, because you have a very diverse
Yeah.
catalogue of albums, but one that I just went, wow, that's really, really interesting because I was driving up to actually the Mary Coughlin gig we were talking about before the interview, and my mom and I were listening to Twist of My Sobriety, and I was going, that's an amazing song. But then I heard the acoustic version, and I went, that's really, really cool. And I listened to the entire acoustic album, and it was so cool hearing songs that I hadn't discovered yet being played in an acoustic way that introduced me to it, and hearing the classics that I loved played on acoustic. Um, what inspired you to record an acoustic record and add that extra rawness that's so powerful on
Yeah,
that album?
yeah. Actually, I think I did it with the guitarist Mark Cresswell, just as a series of podcasts to talk about the songs. And actually, the songs turned out so nicely, the performances, that I ended up just putting them on a record. So yeah, it just started out as a kind of let's talk about songs, and I'll just do an acoustic version to accompany the explanation. But it just sounded, quite nice. So that it was again quite an innocent little creative idea, but people really like that record. So yeah,
It
maybe
worked
I
out
should do
very
them.
well.
So, yeah, it's nice.
It's a
Thank you.
beautiful album, and it's funny though where you're kind of obviously your music can be very energetic and also much quieter, like
Mm,
cathedral song or something like good
mm,
tradition. Obviously, both off ancient art, they're quite different in tonality. So it's interesting to hear the acoustic. Where I listened to a bit of David Keenan, I'm a big fan, and I was chatting to
mm,
David Keenan, and I remember just researching, listening to a beginner's guide to bravery, which was his debut album, and going, oh, so it's much more stripped back. Like Evidence of Living, one of the tracks on it, is very quiet in comparison.
mm.
And then I put on his next album, which I didn't know how energetic that was going to be. And the opening track came on. I was like, Jesus Christ, the amount of space that was added from going from the other album. But it's interesting hearing that acoustic album because the emotion though even though an acoustic album can be much more emotional and raw, it was interesting to see how much emotion you keep even in the studio doing studio albums. You really get to capture a feeling. And with Liar, Love Isn't to Write, the new
Yeah,
record,
yeah.
you really put out a beautiful single, one of the best singles of this year, This Perfect
Oh,
Friend,
thank you.
which is
Thank you.
amazing. And I'd like to ask you before we get into the album, why did you choose that song? Because it's a very impactful one. What kind of message did you want to release to start the rollout of
Uh,
Liar?
well, I wanted to have people really hear the sound of the album as well. I think that was an important, um, it's kind of not message, but a relation. If we're going to start a relationship, I think of albums as a relationship with the listener. And if you want to introduce yourself, maybe try and kind of introduce yourself with a song that has some of the elements which are going to be on the whole album. And it was also the first song that I tried out with the producer, Andy Monaghan from Frightened Rabbit, the band Frightened Rabbit. And the way that he came up with the idea of just repeating the strings and was really a kind of poppiness that I liked. And I think he understood very quickly this idea of this kind of chamber pop music that I wanted to explore on the album. But he also has this very indie sensibility. So there's a kind of darkness to the way he will use those instruments that I really like. So yeah, I thought it had that, and I think it's an intriguing song. So people are very intrigued, and they like the mystery of the song. So I like that. Yeah.
I remember hearing it and seeing the kind of album cover, the pre-save on Spotify, and seeing Liar, Love Isn't to Write. And I just kind of thought to myself, if the title is that provocative, the album is going to be so deep that I
Yeah,
was getting
yeah.
ready to listen to this song. And I was listening to the song and just going, this is so interesting. But I was kind of going where a lot of music nowadays is very upfront and has a very straight up message, which is cool. But I was listening to this, I genuinely do not know what I'm meant to be thinking listening to
I
this track.
yeah. I guess it's about my songs sometimes. I think there's a sweet spot with some of my songs where you really don't know what you're supposed to think. And it's not knowing what you're not supposed to think because it's so awful, but it's because
Yeah.
there's something at the heart of it which is dealing with things which are very confronting. It's about identity, it's about not maybe understanding what's happening in the world or feeling kind of your sense of self is fragmenting. And I think that feeling of being uncomfortable is one I really love that you react like that, because sometimes music can be comforting, but sometimes music can really make you uncomfortable. And there has to be a space for music which makes you go, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to feel. I don't know if I understand what she's trying to say, but I really like it. So that for me is a great reaction.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, when I said, oh, for anybody who's listening, because I know you knew what I mean, Tanisha, but for anybody who's listening,
Yeah.
when I said I don't know what to think, I mean that in a great way. I was very much into kind of when I was like 6 to 9, I was super into riffs and the song. But I've
Yeah.
noticed that recently I've started to drift towards the more provocative of
Mm.
music, and that's led me to discover some really interesting bands. Now, don't get me wrong, like I still love bands like
Yeah.
AC/DC,
Yeah.
bands like that, or instrumentals. I love that, but it's nearly what it makes me feel now. And what I love about your music, Tanita, is that it always makes me feel something. And watching like the video for Twisted My Sobriety, and that was after I listened to the song a lot, and I never watched the video because I actually have a surprisingly small knowledge of music videos. I don't watch them a lot. I was watching this one going, wow, this is so impactful, and that's what I love about your music. And that definitely hit with this track. But what I loved about what you did with the track is you also released a single version, which was live.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
did you decide to release the live single? Because I love it and I think it adds a whole new dimension to this already like 7 dimensional track. It really adds
Right.
something to it that I find is amazing. And I'd love to ask, what was your experience with recording it live and your choice in putting it out there?
Well, I really okay. So when we finished the record, I thought, oh my God, this band is great. It's a shame that we can't see them playing, or it would be really nice to have a record of all these musicians playing together. And then I spoke to my manager and I said, do you know what? Instead of trying to do kind of videos, why don't we just make a recording of the album? We get just film us performing live the album, and find a lovely studio. We were very lucky to find the Empire Studio, which is just, to me, it has a little bit of the magic of Studio B in the Abbey Road. It has this wonderful, for a performer, it's a wonderful place to sing in, because it's not just a dead room. It's really has a beautiful resonance, and yeah, and that was it. I just said, okay, and my producer was like, "That's really bonkers. That's a bit crazy, but let's do it." And everybody was very prepared. I think they all enjoyed, and I just wanted a visual, that you can see what is actually making this sound. It is kind of unexpected. It's an accordion. It's two cellos. It's a violin. There's two guitar. It's a kind of interesting ensemble. So, and that's the sound of the album. So.
That's that's really really cool. And giving that insight though to the listener, I think is um a really amazing though example of what this album's meant to be about, because you can really see in the clips on Instagram, because I was watching some with my mom actually before the interview and she was showing me a couple of clips of you guys playing as a group, and I was actually watching one on Spotify where I saw all the musicians and there was a sense of community and a real
Yeah,
like band playing
yeah,
music that they love.
and
It's
they're all
amazing.
such, they're all a lot of them. They're all really talented individual musicians as well, songwriters, or uh, a soloist like Bartek on the accordion, and he also does. He composes classical contemporary music, as does Zogja, the cellist. So, and Helen on violin was in Dexy's Midnight Runners. So they're all really interesting individual musicians, and I'm really proud that they play with. We kind of play together sometimes. Yeah.
It's a very, and I say this in the best way possible, mad mix of musicians. It really adds to the whole kind of
It
creative
really
aspect
is
of the
mad.
album.
It's totally bonkers. I'm thinking, sometimes I'm standing there going, I don't even know. I'm asking Bartik, Bartik is like this incredible modern accordionist to play good tradition where we're live, and it's just like the funniest. Usually he's like playing the most obscure avant-garde, uh, very technically difficult pieces, and then I'm like, can you just play da 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 da? So yeah, but it's great. I find now with a lot of younger musicians, their abilities are incredible. They're so, they have this, uh, they could be completely confident classically, and yet they can play pop music and blues or soul. It's really extraordinary. So yeah.
It's fantastic. Nearly, I'm kind of thinking about like a mad mix of people. Obviously, people from different genres of music they might play. Then again, the Doors, quite a varied mix of musicians, but they
Yeah,
made some very cool albums. And obviously, the next album is going to be great as well. But we spoke a lot about This Perfect Friend, and I'd love to speak
okay,
about Love Isn't Right as a whole, because
yeah.
even though I haven't heard it, I feel like
I
the
should have
amount of
sent it to you.
time
Yeah,
the
I'm
time
frustrated.
that we've got
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
to
Okay,
think about it till October is brilliant
okay.
because it allows us to get into the mindset of love isn't right and this whole thought behind it. But
Yeah,
you did probably the best presentation I have seen this year for an album. You did a mural. You set up a shop where you were hand painting t-shirts. You were
yeah,
selling protesting kits, which is amazing. As a
yeah.
straight edge punk fan, nothing makes me feel happier than a protest kit. So it was very well done. And I wanted to
Oh,
ask you that inspiration because we were talking a little bit about it before the interview, but I'd love to really get into it with you. That whole idea behind the album, was this something that again kind of came naturally just out of being creative, or was it something that you went, I really want to make a statement with this album and get people involved and make it more than a piece of plastic you put on your turntable but an experience?
yeah. No, that's really interesting. I really, after my last album, I was just hyper aware that what's happening politically in our world is not normal. There are so many very frightening things happening. And I thought, as an artist, you have to respond to the time you live in. You can't just keep pretending everything's normal. So I was really looking on this album to find a way for somebody like me to find their political voice with a poetic language. There are other ways which are much more direct and much more activist. But for me, this was my way of saying, okay, I am not cool with what's going on and I'm really quite scared about it. But in my language. So yeah, so that's why. And Liar, Love Isn't a Right. That song is actually not one of my songs. Love Isn't a Right is a song by Nick Drake's mum, Molly Drake, who wasn't a famous musician, but she was writing songs and kind of recording them at home, I think in the 50s or 60s. And Love Isn't a Right, when we were looking at the song, Helen O'Hara, the violinist, she said, oh, that's an acronym for liar. And I just had this kind of idea that it summed up the album. It was a bit like this, Serge Gainsbourg, Je t'aime moi non plus. It's like I love you, but me neither. It's this idea that love isn't the right, but you're a liar. Love is probably the most important thing. And at the moment, we're talking a lot about taking people's rights away. So it was just playing around with things that are happening and playing around with them poetically. That's the only way I can explain the thinking behind the album. And maybe people will start to ask questions themselves. So
Yeah, I find that truly an incredible feat, not only of musicianship, but in a poetic fashion that you can explore something that dense. Because when I'm listening to music, like I'm 13, I haven't, I don't, not a lot of music resonates with me because I haven't been living for 20 years that I go, oh, well, that makes sense now. Listen back to that track. I can relate to it. I don't relate to a lot of music. But as someone who follows politics and reads a lot about politics, I that did particularly resonate with me. And that's why I think I've gotten really into the whole even the mural, and the video is excellent. If you haven't seen it, I don't know how, because it's everywhere.
Oh,
And you are following Tanita, aren't you? Well, if you aren't, links down below, guys. But you painting the mural, and it was just like, wow, that is just so impactful. Just love isn't right on a wall in bold black and white for
yeah.
everybody to see. It's so upfront that even though you said poetic, it's not as upfront. It kind of is though. You put liar
Yeah,
on
yeah,
a
yeah,
billboard.
yeah. Yeah, well, we're living in the age of lies and lying with impunity, so that's really important. And the artist who really does all the writing is an artist called Charlotte Culinan, and it it was her idea to be very kind of direct and have this. I mean, we all talked about the shop because we just thought it was a really cozy, nice idea, but it was
Yeah.
also a way of also creating community and being open and saying, okay, we're all in this, we're all experiencing this. What do we think about this? And maybe people will be motivated to get more involved in sort of saying, okay, this is not right. Come on. So, but we also want to have fun with it. It's we're living in very serious times, but you can also have a way of, because community and coming together is fun, isn't it? And having, yeah. So
Exactly. The beauty of community is a worthy weapon against a lot of
yeah,
lies that are happening in our world. And
and
I actually,
division, yeah, and creating division. Actually, we have so much more in common. So yeah,
exactly. And I have a question for you because I was just thinking about when you mentioned the shop, and I thought you had the big liar on top of the shop as the sign. And I thought, were there many people who were just walking on the street, looked at a shop that said liar, that was selling protest kits, and a couple of people just popped in their head and just said, I have a question, and that was the journey of a new Tanita Tikaram fan. Were there many new fans that were coming in, buying the t-shirts, going, I can't wait
I
to
think
listen to your music now?
there was like a little group of little skateboarder kids, and the I don't think they had any idea what we were doing. But one of them said, Can I have a picture with you? I really like your t-shirt." So I think that was kind of cool. But I think you do these things, and you want to start a conversation, don't you? It's like well, people are really intrigued by the title, and I think it's really important that we say this isn't normal. These are people who are in public office. They're just lying a lot, and we need to say that that isn't wrong. I want to say to you, Logan, when I was a kid, that was a lot of the things they're doing. They would have just been out of a job. They wouldn't be able to continue. So it's important to, yeah. And if music can kind of, if songs can kind of tell a story, that's a good thing. You can kind of, yeah.
Exactly, especially for someone like me who goes home after school and only puts on records. That's kind of like my communication to the outer world. But it's great. It's great though. And what I will say is, with the two extremes for the album title and even on the shop and the t-shirt, you had two extremes. Both could work well with Liar as the title, or we are making an album about creativity and politics. I think you went for the right choice because the way it's been rolled out is just absolutely amazing. And the second last question I actually want to ask you, and the last one's always a fun one. The
Okay.
second last one that I want to ask you is about connecting Liar to Ancient Heart, because I know they're very different albums, made at very different
Yeah.
times about very different things. So, for someone who doesn't know, could you
Yeah.
explain how the two albums are connected?
Yes, I think that isn't that fun a question. Like, I thought
Oh
you were
no,
going to
the
say.
next question's fun. The
Sorry.
next question's fun,
Oh,
not this
sorry.
question.
I
This,
was gonna.
I'm sorry, I had to bring in like a dense question before
No,
we go with a very fun one. That's
no.
that's the second last one. Then we have the fun one, yeah.
um, um, so yes. So basically, I think that when I was 18, when I wrote the songs, I was doing my A levels, so I was kind of 16, 17, 18. And I think when you're that age, there's a lot of, you're very unsure of your identity. You're still trying to find your place in the world, and you're kind of very wary of the world around you. You're very suspicious of authority. You're suspicious of of what they're trying to tell you when they're not your age. And I think a lot of that comes out on the album. But that searching for your identity is really central to Ancient Heart. But the new album, I feel my identity is actually I'm actually quite grounded. I'm actually quite sure of my place in the world. But the world around me, I'm not sure of what's happening with it, with its values. Their values are changing in a way that I'm very uncomfortable with, and I'm trying to contrast these two times in my life. I'm 55 now, where I'm asking questions about the world around me, and maybe that's what connects them really, and in a way that's more overtly political. I think when I was 18, I was also quite political. I was kind of, I think there are significant events at that time, like the miners' strike and Green and Common and the apartheid movement, that formulated my thinking at the age of as a teenager. And now there are lots of things like Brexit and Trump, which are formulating the way I think now to events that are happening today. So, yeah, there's a kind of parallel, because I think there is a link, and a lot of the ideas that came from my teenage years, a lot of Thatcherism has created the conditions that we're living in today. So there is kind of a link.
Yeah, I can definitely see the link though, in especially for me in a sense, when I'm ever listening to an album, I always look at the kind of try and get insight, and especially the songwriter, the lyricist's passion about the album, and I can see the way Ancient Heart has a very, very similar, the same passion to this new album, with this rollout, this very impactful record. Same with Ancient Heart, but you can definitely see that. So
Okay,
now it's
fun question.
now clarification, fun question. Well, sorry, fun question for me.
Okay.
Yeah. My last question is, what are you listening to at the moment that you would like
Oh,
to share with listeners?
hey, okay. Can I look on my Spotify list?
No
Oh,
problem.
streaming.
If someone asks me, I'm like, oh, I've listened to 30 albums in the last week, but I can't name
Exactly.
one. Yeah,
What am I
it's,
listening to? I have a list, a current list. Okay. What am I listening to? So I go down to the bottom of the list. Um, so I get into kind of, I quite, who I like? I think she's very intriguing. Aldous, is it Aldous Harding? I like some of her music. I like the Gabrielles. They're kind of cool. Um, I like I'm walking down. The last thing I put on my list was, uh, uh, okay, something called Dangerous by Conroy Smith. Do you know that?
no, I don't. I'm going to check all of these out because I love listening to these recommendations.
I've got Billie Eilish here. I've got something called Kive Lenge by the Kalambaya Boys. Nancy Sinatra Zodiac Blues. Uh, Concrete Mama, Keith Jarrett. Hit or Miss Odetta. Uh, yeah, is that? I've got one Sinead O'Connor here. Take me to church. Um, yeah, Stardust, Hoagie Carmichael. I have a real mix-up.
And I
Michelle.
thought I had an eclectic mix of music. That is mad. The amount of the diversity in the music there. I'm so excited now to check all that out because I love asking that question. Now most people don't have their phone on hand, or they can't because the screen will freeze or something. So they end up being like, okay, what have I been listening to? Because it's actually really, really hard. And it's like people who aren't into music, they're like, oh yeah, well, I listen to this band every so often. And then if I'm asked about it, I'm like, I don't know. You review music. It's what you do. Yeah, I don't think I've been listening to music. It just, but I'm really glad you had the Spotify list ready that I can listen out to some of them. And that was my last question, my
Oh,
fun
brilliant.
question. So I want to thank you, Tanita, for
Oh, that was.
joining me. This was
Oh,
a fantastic interview. The album I cannot wait for. Love Isn't Right, guys. Pre-order is available down below, as well as everything mentioned in this. Follow Tanita. You won't regret it. She's got some amazing stuff coming out on her social media. She's making fantastic music. Also
oh,
follow me. Be nice. And it's coming out 10th of October. Put it
yeah.
on your calendar. It's going to be a big day. Thank you so much, Tanita, for joining me here. I hope you
Oh,
enjoyed the chat.
Logan, that was excellent. You are a star. Thank you so much, darling. And I really enjoyed. You're just so you are so knowledgeable about music. It's wonderful. I learned
Thank you
things.
so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much, Tanita. Check
Oh,
out the
brilliant.
album, guys.
Okay. I go.
See you.
Logan, thank
Bye
you so much, darling. And
bye, Tanita.
yeah, and just send me all the links and socials that you do. I'll share it on mine. It was really good fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so
Okay.
much, Tanita. Bye
All
bye.
right. Bye bye.